So now let's tie it all together. Let's tie it all together with the kind of final piece, the central element to all of it, the very familiar part of a customer-centric business being customer success. We're finally talking about customer success. The last section I want to talk about in the customer-centric company piece, because the whole point of this was to talk about how customer success isn't a siloed department. It's not the end game. It's not this thing. It is the culmination of all the other parts together. I often talk about your customer success department or customer success CSMs rather being the spiders at the center of the web, the ones who communicate everything, the visible, I mean spiders, the visible piece of everything that ties all the parts together. They speak to sales during the early introduction process. They do some of the RFP pitching so that um, companies can see that long-term relationship piece early. They speak to development, so development can understand customers and vice versa. They're on that support piece. They talk to the marketing and sales piece. They talk to implementation, everything. They are product experts. They are sales experts. They are communications experts. They are consultants. They are the built-in cream of the crop, the best of the best, the core of the entire company. Now, while your best sales guy ever may be the best sales guy ever and maybe the top performing employee on the team, they don't know as much with the width and breadth and depth that uh, your customer success managers do. Customer success managers done well know everything. They have a seat at the table. They can have a conversation with or on behalf of every single department at the company. They understand the big picture. They understand the strategy. They understand how the product is meant to be used for a single customer, for a region, and across the entire customer base. They understand the development schedule. They understand bug fixing. They understand the strategy for the individual use cases that may come up for customers. But at the end of it all, they are connected with every single other team across the entire company. The entire company is built in a way that feeds to and then hears back from the spiders at the center of your web, your customer success folks. Now, I've gone department by department all the way through some of the key departments that are actually kind of behind building a company. And all of that was kind of feeding into customer success. It was a quick pitch for how each team can be structured a little bit differently in a way that supercharges customer success. The number one most important thing to do for customer success is to not have it be in a silo, to not have the department be this freestanding piece that's by itself, to have it be an integral part of every single step along the way. Because when you talk about your customer success managers and customers, your customer success managers are the relationship between the customers and your entire company. On some level, you can think of them as mini founders. Terrible term, but mini founders. I would argue that a founder led business approach is the single best business approach out there because founders are decision makers. They are product, they are development, marketing, they are the customer piece, they do sales, they do support. Really engaged founders know everything at founding teams, and customer success managers are the scaled version of a founder-led business model. That's a big part of what the function is and what it does, and why it's so powerful, and why it's so important to give CS the full resources they need to be CS, to make sure every other team understands CS, and make sure that the communication is fluid to and from across the board. It is amazing to see how business growth succeeds, customer sentiment, advocacy, renewal, retention, upsells, all of the hard number metrics that companies care about on any level are absolutely skyrocketed by a powerful customer success team. Is customer success expensive? Yes. Is it labor intensive? Yes. Does it take intensive training and a lot behind it? Sure. But the company doesn't actually run without it. And although you could run much leaner without CSMs, you could replace half of them with AI, you will see an immediate negative impact. And if you didn't build all the frameworks I've outlined in this playlist up to now, you won't even know why. What you'll find is that as you start cutting threads of the spider web and putting the spiders in a box, that suddenly they're just spiders without a web. And they have so much less opportunity to actually influence customer relationships, to make development decisions, to drive the growth of the company in a way that is healthy, robust, and builds that incredible customer sentiment and advocacy. The cost to revenue of not doing customer success in a successful way is insane. And I see so many teams and departments right now putting in a customer success team and being like, yeah, I mean, people just talking to our customers makes money, right? Like, sure, that's how it works. But it doesn't just work that way. You need all of the moving parts together working as a single cohesive customer centric whole. And that doesn't mean taking away the driving rights to your company. It doesn't mean giving up decision making. It doesn't mean making it not profitable. It means the exact opposite of all of that. But just to kind of highlight a couple things about this, here's my big story. I'll go ahead and do the big story here. So one of my key relationships, Lawton School District, they came on board. They were very. It was a strategically critical account, right? It was in the middle of the company's home territory. Was a long-term advocate, a big high-end user, one of the biggest school districts in the state. And they also were in the backyard of our most aggressive direct competitor, who was in person pitching them all the time, trying to get them to move back to their service. Apogee winning them was a huge strategic win, both just as a customer, as a region space, and then just as a win. Like we were able to meet their needs better than the competitor was. One day the tone shifted, and we're talking this live communication piece. And if I was a siloed CSM, I would have seen the tone shift and I probably would have recognized it, but I wouldn't have been able to do anything about it. I would have put up a flag. It would have taken 2 weeks to run up the chain. I would have said, hey, something's weird here. Would have taken a month to run up to the chain and then a decision on how to act come back to me. That is a siloed customer success team that will not work. All they have is that single point of communication with the contact, with the customer. They don't have the authority to act on it. They don't have the authority to make changes. Now, here's what happened instead. Because we had the marketing arm reaching out, because we had the prospecting and the sales arm paying attention to this stuff, we knew that this school was about to bring in a new superintendent. We also knew that that superintendent was already sold on the competitor. He was an advocate for our direct competitor. Huge red flags. We'd already thrown up those red flags before the communication tone even changed. And this is a case where the lead contact at the customer was not the top decision maker. This was a comms director and assistant superintendent, somebody who had a lot of authority, but not the final decision making authority. So a new superintendent could come in and change the plan overnight. And that was always a risk too, right? Whenever you're talking about all of this customer centricity, just to highlight that there, that if you have really entrenched advocates, if you have people who like the product, understand the product, and are used to your company, they will advocate for you internally, again, in a room you're not in. Now, in this case, the way that that manifested was my contact was towing the party line, as it were, and so was presenting the conversation in a way without really saying what was actually going on, but came to the conversation with a laundry list of asks. They were asking for bug fixes, they were asking for new features, they were asking very pointed questions that because of the background, we already knew there was a new leader coming in who was already sold on the competitor. We saw exactly the things that were asked for in their attack ad, saying like Apogee doesn't do this, Apogee doesn't have that, we do. Apogee doesn't do this well, we do. And so they were pushing us on all of Apogee's weakest points to build a conversation chain, to build a justification clause for the board for why they were going to switch to a different vendor. Now, again, we knew that because of the R&D arm, because I was trained enough from the sales and research side to know that that's what this was, that this was a justification train. Again, a siloed CSM would not know that. And then as we had this conversation, so I was given this laundry list of asks. I said, and here's the thing, because I worked closely with product development and support, I knew the status of the bugs. I could say which ones were being fixed where and what the timeline was on them. I knew that. And then in terms of what products were coming out, because I've worked so closely with product and dev, I knew the release schedule. I was aware of what was coming and where. And while I didn't give specific dates or total details, I said, these are things that are in the books. We expect them relatively soon. What is your timeline? And then on the feature ask for things that we couldn't do and didn't have in the pipe, I was able to look at those and pre-prime the conversation knowing which ones were likely to happen and which ones weren't. Hugely important, very valuable. There's where we are. So I went to my direct manager and talked to him live real time. I didn't have to wait a week. I didn't have to wait a month. I didn't send a message and wait for it to come back. Live real time conversation. That leadership piece is massive and ties all of this together. And none of this department stuff I've talked about works if you don't have buy-in and support from your leadership. Talk to my direct manager, let him know what the conversation had happened. And we had already had a preliminary conversation because we again knew about the new superintendent coming in. Um, and so after that conversation, I laid out what I wanted to do. I said, um, I want to talk to product and dev, give them this list and go ahead and sit down and talk about what's doable and what's not. if any of this stuff is we can roll out for them as a beta test, if there's anything we can do and roll out a little bit early specifically for them, letting them know that this is special treatment as a way to pitch that as a retention strategy. And they approved it, said what was, gave me some red lines of like, this isn't going to happen, but let's have this conversation. I sat down with product and dev, and again, it was real time. I didn't have to put in a ticket and wait weeks to get that back. That fast communication thing, I mean, even if it took a couple days, that's fine. But it wasn't a month, it wasn't a long time, it didn't get lost in the weeds. It was a human conversation between me and the dev folks who I knew well. Very important. So we put together an actual plan, and I was very impressed with it. It was very thorough. It addressed all of the concerns. All the bugs were going to be fixed. Most of the features were launching within the time span or were coming soon. And then there were only a very small handful of pieces we couldn't do. And even on those, I was able to hand code with some HTML and CSS with the development team where we could do a fill in while that was being developed. I sent that back to my lead contact. We had a really good conversation. But even at the end of that, they'd given us such an aggressive deadline, intentionally knowing that it was going to fail. And that again is the kind of thing that I wouldn't know if I was a siloed CSM, didn't understand what was going on. That external context, having the extra support from the teams and that extra preliminary research from the SDR teams, knowing this was hugely helpful to understanding what happened. So in the end, they churned. They went ahead and churned. There was the usual the justifiable conversation path of like, oh, you didn't meet all of our asks within our time window, therefore we're going to churn and go to a competitor. Uh, what had been planned all along, but it still sucked. This hurt. It was a highly strategic account with the full context here too. I fully like I took responsibility for this, of course. Like this was a raw deal. This sucks, but still, I was the CSM, and if there was anyone who could have turned this around, it was me with the support of the teams that were helping me at the time. Now, my manager was very understanding. It was great. It was good. We had a good conversation. Um, and then this would have been a moment where we could have cut off the client. We could have penalized them for ending their contract early. We could have billed them extra. We could have done a lot of the bridge burning practices you see some businesses do, but we didn't because that's mean. Don't do that. And also, it's counterproductive. I've talked all the time about the importance of advocacy and relationship building, even if sometimes that means a customer churns. Now, you don't want to just let them churn. You want to try to protect them, but you want to make sure you are sticking with decisions that are healthy for the company. There were some things we said no to, and that was important. And we didn't just say no, we gave justification for it and talked through like, we're not going to do that because of these reasons. We're going to build something similar because of these reasons. So we had justification for that. But there was still pushback. We didn't just roll over and try to protect this, whatever was going on. We didn't give it to them for free. Um, any of that. So the customer churned, and we went ahead and just freely offered, like, you know what, we'll help you with any transition you need. We'll go ahead and make sure that your data is like carried over. We'll make sure this is an easy transition. We don't want it to be painful. And it was easy. And then I talked here and there a little bit with the customer because we had had this very strong relationship before, because they believed in the company so much, because it had been such an easy transition process. The lead contact continued to come back to me with questions, not a ton here and there, but like gradually increasing. And then after about 2 months, came back to me in a bit of a panic saying, hey, this tool we were promised that we use every single day is not out yet. Can we please continue to use the messaging tool that we've used before with your company? We still had the data in there built in just in case for like a certain number of times. So we still had it all set up, already primed. They already had user accounts. They already had trained users on how to use it. So I again checked with my manager, real-time live conversation, went to the sales team, and he drafted a custom contract for how they could use just that piece of the toolbox month to month for just this transition period. So it was a month to month contract. So we were able to make them a custom contract for custom use of the tool real time. It took, I think, 24 hours to turn that around for them, which again, really, really key. That demonstrated, hey, we're so good. We can do this. We are going to bill you, of course, like you do have to pay for these services, but you can continue to use them because you need them because we support you as a customer. And that was huge. So they were able to fill in this crucial communications gap that otherwise they would have just completely been left without. And then we started getting reports again from our sneaky marketing arm that was getting a lot of this reports of an internal revolt at the customer where there were a ton of users in the district downstream who had used the product as users, not leadership decision makers, but as day-to-day users of the platform. who immediately missed it and talked up how much they cared about it, how much they liked it, and absolutely hated the new tool. So that was one little ripple in the water there, that we had a well-trained user base at the customer. We had entrenched internal advocates because we'd taken the time to train them and support them through our live support chat, through development of the tool, making sure they could use it, through conversations with them where I would train downstream users instead of saying like they're not worth my time. I only do top level trainings or here's a video. I individually trained some of these folks so they really loved the tool and knew how to use it. And that was a level of product stickiness that was very, very deep. Another month or two later, and my lead contact comes back saying, hey, the implementation's been really bad. There's a billing issue where they're charging us based on use instead of just giving us this tool. So this was a really heavy user of phone calls and text messages. And they found out after the sale that they would be billed more per call, more per text message over a certain level of usage. So there was a gotcha in the billing that a competitor did. And that really surprised both the lead contact and the advocate who had just made the churn. And so they continued using our communication software a little bit longer using the phone system. And then in, I think, under 6 months, they came back on as a customer. And by that time, we were able to deliver even more of their laundry list of asks that they'd had. And it was the most secure that customer was ever going to be. Where they just tried to churn, they just switched over and had an incredibly painful experience with the direct competitor that they were most likely to go with. And they had seen how well supported they were, how much their internal staff liked our tool, how supportive we were even when they weren't a current customer, and how much we were able to do for them when the other company couldn't deliver on any of their promises. Now, for me personally, just on a CSM side note, I still consider that a fail because in many ways we succeeded and won them back because the other company did some things wrong. If the other company had been just as honest and had a comparable product and delivered on the promises they made, we may never have gotten them back, even with the internal revolt, even with the way we handled that. So that still was a really cautionary tale and something to watch out for because I still consider them a churn. But then now they are back on with Apogee and have been on since. This was 5 years ago. Excuse me. So that was a really important story. So implementation was able to hop in and fast track them to get them live. Development was able to roll out some of the beta feature tools they'd asked for their new launch. I was able to step in and do some things by hand. Sales was able to give them a new contract very quickly. We were able to get them back on track almost immediately with no delay in payment, and no delay in their services for using the things day to day. So no delay for them. It was almost a painless transition for them going back on our platform. We made it easy, we made it approachable for them, and we just maintained that relationship that we'd had with them the whole time. Now, a couple things I wanted to be sure to highlight in that story. That is incredibly relationship and product based. It was as the CSM handling the conversation with inputs and outputs from every other team. I had direct support from leadership, authority to make these decisions and make my suggestions. I had authority to lead the conversations. I had authority to go talk to development, to talk to sales, to make these one-off custom decisions for this customer for a lot of reasons. But I mean, just to be able to react to that situation in a way that was very flexible, not rigid, not slow. We were able to be nimble and effective in winning back that relationship really fast. It's really, really important that your teams be able to pull that kind of thing off. It's not going to happen every time. It's not going to happen all the time. But a stress test like that tells you exactly which parts of your process are broken, tells you exactly which parts of your teams are working well together. And if your company isn't capable of doing any of those steps, you can't save businesses like this. You can't keep this level of stickiness for a customer. If your teams aren't able to talk to each other and coordinate very well, this kind of thing doesn't happen. I would have just had to say no right out of the gate, would have been adjourned, gone by. If I wasn't given the authority and freedom to keep talking to them, even though they had churned, that would have been a problem. And that's something that some CS managers would have said, don't waste your time. They're a churn, let them go. Uh, if sales hadn't been able to or willing to write a custom contract, or if contracts took a long time, or if leadership took months to approve any move that I took, all of that turns out differently. So yes, it was a churn, but we saved it, and it was a really important customer. And every single piece of that worked because all of the pieces of the process worked together in the way they'd been built and designed to do. I have rambled. That is a really strong example of how we were able to manage a small scale but still significant crisis and how all of the interconnected teams work together in a way that made that work really well. Hopefully, this has been helpful. That's the end of my playlist. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know if you have any questions. Cheers.